It wasn't just the MTC that was breaking new ground in Formula One. In a behind-the-scenes programme that looked at the human element of what we were doing, McLaren was hoping to maximise our performance as a team. Under the inspirational leadership of Dr. Aki Hintze, an expert in the science of human high performance, the McLaren Lab was born. Hey guys, and welcome to another Tales from the Treehouse. In today's video, we're going to be talking about an area that McLaren really pioneered in Formula One and laid the foundations for what the sport is today in many ways. I'm talking about the McLaren Lab, as you just heard, which is a program of human high performance that at the time nobody else within the pit lane was even interested or looking into. At McLaren we looked into it pretty seriously, and it really was a bit of a game changer. Primarily, Aki's first-class facilities and expertise were for our drivers, but he soon convinced Ron that there was some merit in focusing on the pit stop crew too. Unlike most sports where the backroom staff do their work before a game or event, a Formula One pit crew play a crucial and active role during each and every Grand Prix. Aki believed the explosive, physical and critical nature of what we did meant our well-being should be nurtured and invested in. If we were serious about looking for improvements, no matter how small and in every single area, the enhancement of the pit crew was something we couldn't ignore. More importantly, none of our rivals were doing it, so it represented an immediate competitive advantage. That was all Ron needed to hear to make it happen. And from there, things catapulted forward, because whenever Ron Dennis buys into an idea, whenever he believes in an idea, whenever he sees an opportunity in an idea, he doesn't go at it half-hearted. He goes all or nothing, and that's what he did here. He gave Aki a full remit to use the full resources at their disposal to maximise what he saw as a great competitive opportunity to steal a march on our rivals. All the drivers in Formula One had their own personal trainers, physical trainers. But what Aki decided that was a real opportunity for us to focus on was going beyond that, looking at the human science of performance, looking at the mental capacity of the humans within the sport, as well as the physiological capacity of those humans, and not just the humans that sat behind the wheel either. Initially we began physical training programs, and unsurprisingly, not everybody warmed to the experience. Some of the old guard believed they were already the best at what they did. They didn't need to work out or become fitter just to prove it. But as time went on and the competitiveness within the team grew, that all changed. A 16-stone middle-aged Chucky working on the pit crew just couldn't cut it anymore. All of us had to be in shape, and to improve our technical skills we began practicing almost every day in an increasingly structured way. We even created a pit stop practice mule car so we could train for specific roles in the factory when the race cars weren't there or were still under construction. And that might seem obvious, but actually in truth nobody else was doing that at the time. Today everybody has a practice pit stop car or even practice pit stop rigs, but back then the only way we could practice pit stops was when we had a complete car available, and that didn't really happen until we were at the event and could push the car out of the garage and into the pit lane. We went on the trips that I've already talked about in previous videos to the Finnish Olympic Institute, Quartene, where we had full biometric testing done, looking at as individuals what our strengths and weaknesses were. Could we tailor physical programs to the specific roles that we had as individuals in a pit stop? These were areas that nobody else was looking at. We looked at the mental capacity of what we needed to do for our role and whether our own mental capacity or our mental strengths and weaknesses suited that particular task. We weren't the only ones to have physically suffered at the whims of Aki. He was also punishing our drivers, pushing them hard in training and tracking their body temperatures to study how it affected performance levels. In doing so, he found a real advantage in lowering a race driver's core temperature at the hot events before and even during a race. It improved their reaction times and decision-making ability considerably. Keeping the body as close to normal operating temperatures became a focus, and the drivers were soon wearing frozen vests right up until the point of getting into their car, their heads wrapped in cold towels as they waited to drive away. Inside the cockpit, special pouches were moulded onto the back of the race seat, and it was my job to fill them with dry ice just before the drivers buckled in. As well as cooling the seat, this had the added benefit of keeping the driver's onboard drinks bag chilled for longer. With all this attention to detail bringing human performance enhancements to the drivers in their cars, it wasn't long before keeping the pit crew cool became the next big focus. But it being McLaren and Ron being Ron, he wasn't just going to go out and buy a new air conditioner for the garage and be done with it. No, Ron came up with a very McLaren-like, a very scientific way to start thinking about keeping the pit stop crew cool. If we were going to revolutionise the world, we'd go big, and we were going to PR the shit out of it along the way. At a time when F1 budgets were seemingly bottomless, we went to the European Space Agency, the ESA, for help. And before we knew it, tests were being done on a new, specially designed pit stop suit using ESA temperature controlling technology and cutting edge materials. Yeah, these incredible looking suits. You may remember this because, of course, being McLaren, we made a massive fuss about all of this in the media. These suits were almost like a spacesuit. Unsurprisingly, they were covered in tiny little systems of pipework all around the exterior of the suit that carried with it a cooling fluid. When we got into the garage, we would plug these suits into a chiller system that was laid out around the garage floor, and that would circulate this cooling fluid through our suits, lowering the pit crew's body temperature. As part of the scientific testing of one of these suits, a model or guinea pig had been chosen to conduct some temperature controlled experiments in the factory, and it was at that point that we all rocked up to see what all the fuss was about. What we saw was quite extraordinary, because what they had done is taken, I think it was a poor guy out of the marketing department as a guinea pig. They had called him in one day and said, right, today we are going to put you in the existing pit stop suits. There's a standard pit stop suits. We're going to rig you up with temperature sensors all over your body, little thermocouples taped all over different parts of your body. And then we're going to put you in the autoclave. Now, for those who don't know, the autoclave is essentially a giant oven used for baking carbon fibre components till they go off. It's a huge industrial oven, and this poor guy was being asked to sit in there for hours whilst it raised the temperature to some of the hottest conditions that we would see over the course of a Grand Prix season, whilst they monitored his temperature throughout the process. And of course then, when that was over, he'd have to get into this new spaceman-like looking suit with the same thermocouples rigged all over him, and get back in there for another few hours whilst they cooked him. And of course, the difference between the two provided the results to whether or not this thing was effective or not. None of us could help but absolutely piss ourselves laughing, because this poor guy would come out of this oven absolutely destroyed. I mean, he was baked. He was literally baked. He was almost broken, the poor guy. I never actually saw the results, the data from these tests, other than what I saw with my own eyes as this guy clambered out of the oven. But either way, the suits were signed off and we were to then use them at the British Grand Prix. Ironically, probably one of the coldest races that we ever went to around the world. Ron was going to make a big song and dance about the whole thing. This was going to be a public promotion of these new suits, of this new idea. But it was being done even before we, the pit stop crew, had a chance to actually try them on. A photo call was announced in a press release ahead of our Thursday afternoon pit stop practice, in which the world would be introduced to our revolutionary new system, as would we be for the very first time. Out of sight at the back of the garages, we struggled into our new gear. Some of it fitted, some of it didn't. Chairs were set up for us at the front, as they would have been for the race, and the pipework and cooler unit was installed. We were ready to plug in. Everything was new, so there were some inevitable teething issues. With a bank of photographers waiting for us in the pit lane, there was no time to change anything. We moved to the front of the garage, sat down, and plugged into the pipework running across the floor between our rows of chairs. The system was switched on, and the cameras began clicking away. Now, I can tell you, sitting in those seats with a bank of photographers at the front of our garage taking photos of us all looking like spacemen, I felt nervous. Nervous partly because they were also about to come and take pictures of us going to do our pit stop practice. Now, you know, there's a certain amount of pressure when pit stop practice comes, not obviously like the race, but you don't want to mess things up. And when there are photographers around, which there always were to some extent, the last thing you want to do is have people taking pictures of you having some kind of failure or some kind of accident. And now there were a huge number of photographers, way more than we'd ever had at pit stop practice before, and they were all there, seemingly ready for us to fail. Which of course is what we did. Our normal pit stop practice ensued, and we were soon called into action on the radio by Dave Ryan, the team manager. Leaping up from our chairs, we unplugged the pipes, or at least most people did, and ran into the pit lane. Unfortunately, one or two forgot, and there was utter chaos as loops of piping became entangled in chair legs and ankles, with several people tripping up on their way out of the garage. Outside, there was a ripple of excitement at what we were wearing, not least for the fact that we all had futuristic backpacks on. No one had seen anything like it before, but we continued with our very real pit stop practice session, with the photographers clambering over each other to get their dramatic action shots. I could hear onlookers talking, speculating whether the packs contained a compressed gas unit for adjusting tyre pressures, or blowers for cooling brakes and radiators. All of the theories were wide of the mark, but it was amusing to hear them nonetheless. Now, I think the pit stop practice itself kinda went okay. It certainly wasn't the best we had ever had, but we'd run out of the garage tripping over, dragging chairs with this system of pipework. We'd got out into the pit stop area, and because of all the fuss that was going on, because of the uncomfortableness of suits that didn't really fit, it certainly wasn't smooth and plain sailing like it should have been. Unfortunately, because we hadn't been able to try the system out in private, some of the suit's flaws, a few of them teething, others more serious, were being discovered live under the glare of the world's media. They were heavy and uncomfortable. The backpacks restricted movement and took up too much space in what is already such a crowded environment around the car. The futuristic helmets and visor design impaired our peripheral vision, and almost comically, the whole lot was all so bulky and cumbersome, it ended up making us feeling hotter than the original suits had ever done. It took us some time to persuade Ron that we could not use the suits, and he only backed down once the question of them adversely affecting pit stop performance was finally mentioned. They went quietly back in a box, never to be seen again. So it was an utter disaster. This whole massive PR show of McLaren designing these space-age suits to try and improve our pit stops had inadvertently made the pit stops slower, more unpredictable and less repeatable than we'd been able to achieve prior to that. It was classic Ron in so many ways, but of course behind all of that was this brilliant way of thinking, led by Ron and by Dr. Aki, about thinking differently, about the way a team operated, something that has, as I said before, laid the foundations for the sheer brilliance that is the human performance side of Formula One today. McLaren were at the very forefront of that. And whilst that particular episode was slightly comical in so many ways, I was really proud to be part of this pioneering effort to improve pit stops and the entire team performance in every single detail. That was a really impressive, really proud moment for me as a member of that McLaren organisation, and I'm pleased to see that it's continued to this day, and still we are striving for tiny little details that can make us better in every single area. I hope you enjoyed that one, guys. Slightly different, I suppose, but I think it's a funny story, but also hopefully a slightly inspirational story about how making changes, looking for improvements when actually we were probably already the best at pit stops before we went through this process. So even still, we were looking for improvements when the competition was some way behind us. Kind of what Red Bull are doing today. Anyway, there you go. That is another Tales from the Treehouse done. Let me know if you liked it by giving it a thumbs up, and please do subscribe to the channel. There's a whole playlist of these Tales from the Treehouse stories, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's some quite good ones in there, I think you'll agree. And let me know if there's another subject you'd like me to cover from right up here in a pretty windy treehouse today. Ta-da.